Hey everyone, George here and welcome back to the channel. So today we're going to be talking about medications. We're going to be talking about a couple of different things regarding medications. Number one, when you should use them, and number two, how you should use them. There are all kinds of different medications on the market. I'm going to talk about the ones that I like and I think work really well. I've had some unfortunate experiences if you've been watching the last couple of videos with some fish that came in from South America. So I've had to deal with this, and we're going to talk about that, and we're going to really talk about when you use the lighter medications for a small problem and when you go to the big stuff that really is powerful, and some of the things that you're going to need to take into consideration before you use them, such as plants, invertebrates, etc. Hang in there with me. We're going to come right back and we're going to talk about that. So when we talk about medicating fish, we're talking about something that we don't really want to have to do, but every once in a while it just happens, and it can be our fault or it can be just something that just happens in our tanks. Now, most of the time it's something that we have done wrong and we're trying to fix it. We're either not quarantining fish properly, or we're introducing fish that are unhealthy into our tank a little too fast. We're not sometimes acclimating the fish correctly. And there's some very common diseases that come with fish that we need to talk about, and I'm going to get right to it here. The first one would be ick. That is something that all of us who are in this hobby are going to deal with at one time or another. Now, there are two medications that I absolutely love here for this. ICX being the number one. This is my go-to medication because it works well with planted aquariums. It does not harm them, and it knocks ick out really fast, especially if you get it in its early stages. Now, Paragard is another one here that will work with ick, but it also is something that you're going to find that works with parasites of other types as well. So it's a little bit more broader. I love Seachem products. They're absolutely fantastic for just about any kind of issue that you're going to have with your aquarium, or everyday solutions to using these products, such as medicating new fish that maybe are coming into your system, into your quarantine tank. I like to medicate very lightly my tanks on every fish that comes in, just because I feel better that when I introduce them to my community tank, I am not going to have a disaster on my hands. Now, these things aren't always the first weapons of choice, especially if you have a problem that is way beyond ick. Maybe you've got external parasites on these fish, or fungal situations on fish that are coming in, that these are just not going to work on. So we're going to move these off to the side here, and we're going to talk a little bit more about some things that are going to be some heavy hitters, and we'll save the biggest heavy hitter for last here. Now, sometimes there's a secondary problem that comes in with a fungal infection or a parasitical infection, and that is a bacteria infection. So you need antibiotics right away. This one here, Canaplex, is absolutely fantastic for taking care of that. I think it's like one level spoon for every 20 gallons, and it can be used every 2 days. Now, I don't recommend using this in a planted tank, and I certainly don't want you to have invertebrates in your tank if you are using this in your tank and not quarantining your tank with fish that are in a separate tank. In other words, if you're having to put this in a community tank of some sort, that's going to be really hard on plants. So you want to get your fish into a quarantine situation or a hospital tank. Hopefully you have one on hand. I recommend a 20-gallon minimum, and that is going to really do the job for you. Now, the next one here is made by Fritz, which I really like a lot. It's called Maricin Oxy, and this is really good for fungal and some bacteria stuff. Now, I don't believe that this is going to really be beneficial to you in the bacteria area, but I have used this in a planted aquarium, and I didn't see any real bad results from it, but it's not recommended to use this when you are putting it in a planted aquarium. So again, try to get yourself a quarantine tank, a minimum of 20 gallons, like I said, and use these medications. Do not use them together unless you are absolutely certain that you have talked to someone that knows what they're doing or what they're talking about, or you're going to cause some severe problems with your fish and other inhabitants in your tank. And again, invertebrates, this is not good for invertebrates. This is something that you just don't want to put in with your invertebrates. Now, the last thing, the last resort that I have is cupramine. And this is a very, very strong medication that you do not want to use in anything but a quarantine tank or hospital tank. It will kill your plants. It will mess up your biological bacteria, your good bacteria that's in your tank, and will cause problems with that. When we come back, we're going to talk about when you should know how to use when you should know when to use these medications, and we're going to talk about a little bit more about how to diagnose some of the things that your fish may be suffering from. There are lots of different things out there that can happen with fish, even fish that you've had for a long time. We're all susceptible to it. None of us are immune to it. When we come back, we're going to talk about it a little bit more, so hang in there with me. So as I said in the intro, and as I said in my conversation about these medications, every one of us are going to run into a problem with needing to medicate our fish over time. The most common problem is ick. Now, one of the things that's going to show up on ick first is it's going to look like your fish were sprinkled with a salt shaker, and that can happen literally overnight. Always quarantine your fish. This is a disease that there's a lot of debate about whether or not it's in the tank all the time and just attacks fish that are weak, or if it is something that is brought in by new fish. Regardless of that situation, you want to take care of fish where you see this kind of thing developing. If you see, for example, a fish that has some kind of, and I'm going to show you some pictures of what that looks like. I'm going to attach it to this. Of a fish that looks like it's been, just sprinkled with salt, literally, that is ick, and it is something that's easily treatable if you catch it very early. The initial stages of ick, you're going to see just a few spots on a couple of different fish in your tank, probably new fish that you brought in, or new invertebrates maybe that you brought in. It is not something that typically can go on an invertebrate and be carried into a tank, but it can literally be brought in just in the water if you're putting that water in your tank, and that's something you should never ever do. But the other problem that you could have is bringing in new plants. Sometimes we bring in new plants and we don't think about quarantining those plants just like we would a fish, because we think that the plants are safe from any kind of problems with this sort of thing. Well, that's not true. Plants can carry diseases. They should be rinsed off. They should be isolated for a few days before you put them into your tank, just to make sure that there isn't anything on those plants that are going to get into your tank. When we come back, I'm going to kind of talk about some of the common things to do when you're in a crisis situation, which I recently was in, and we're going to talk about how being patient, not panicking, and how taking care of these fish very quickly can sometimes mean the difference between the life and death of a very expensive fish sometimes, or a fish that you really, really care about. Hopefully you care about all of your fish, but I know that there's certain fish that we get attached to, and we want to make sure that their health is in consideration at all times. When we come back, we're going to talk about that. So when we talk about medicating fish, I'm going to talk about it with unapologetic experience, to be honest with you. And the bottom line is the biggest cause of problems with fish needing to be medicated are one of two things. Number one, impatience in setting up your tank, an uncycled tank, one that is not a healthy environment to put fish in. This is always a recipe for disaster. It's always a situation where your fish are going to suffer because an uncycled tank means water parameters that are way off, and it means that you have not taken the time to set that tank up and you've put fish in it way too soon. Now, checking water parameters is something that people just don't think about. They walk into a PetSmart or a Petco, somebody talks them into buying a fish tank. They walk out with a 20-gallon tank, a bunch of fish, some gravel, some plastic plants, a piece of wood, or some places for things to hide. They are told that they can put in some microbial bacteria that's going to allow their fish to be put in right away. That is a joke. That doesn't ever work. It is absolutely something you should never do. If you do, you're going to need every one of these things, and you're going to lose a lot of fish along the way. So what I'm going to talk about is what I think you should do when you get fish to prevent disease, and we're going to talk a little bit about some of the lighter medications that I recommend for new tanks and quarantine tanks. Now, like I said, ICX is not hard on planted tanks. It's not hard on biological systems or anything else. I recommend a little bit of this. If you've got a tank that you've got brewing that's a 20-gallon tank, and you have it cycled already and it's used as a quarantine tank, this is an absolutely perfect medication to use for that particular environment, and so is the Paragard. Both of these two right here are going to be something that you can use in your quarantine tanks. Do the water changes like you're supposed to do. Follow the instructions on these, and you can really get rid of most parasite type situations like ick, velvet, any of those kind of diseases that show up on fish. Now, if you get into a situation where your fish are really starting to deteriorate really badly, don't wait. There's things that you need to do to make sure that you are making an effort to try to save those fish by using medications that are a little bit stronger. And that's where Maricin comes in, Maricin Oxy comes in. That's a great Fritz product that's a little bit stronger, and it has all of the things in there that are necessary to knock some of these things out and prevent you from losing fish. We don't want to get to that point, but if we get to that point, that is where we want to talk about using these kind of medications. Again, if you have a fungal or a parasite situation and you have a secondary bacteria infection, then we're talking about Canaplex here being the next thing that I would use. And again, I would only use that under the supervision of somebody that knows what they're doing. And you don't want to use this in a planted or community tank. This is something that I would be very careful, again, to use in strictly a quarantine type tank or a hospital type tank. And this is a very good medication that you can use, and do not use it with anything else. I cannot stress that enough, because if you don't know what you're doing, you're going to over medicate your fish and you're going to cause a bigger problem, and your fish are going to die. And then the last resort is cupramine. Now, this is a heavy hitter, like I said, and these kinds of situations are when there really isn't anything else left to do except for to try something that is extremely potent in the tank, and that is what cupramine does. And we want to try never to get to that situation. So what I would tell you is this: please quarantine your fish, put them in a hospital tank. Do not put them in your community tank. Or if you have one single tank and you're only planning on having one tank and you want to have that tank beautiful and thrive for you. I don't care if it's real plants or you got sunken ships in there and stuff for the kids and whatever. You can still have a beautiful, well-kept tank if you use good sense about quarantining those fish in a separate tank. In that situation, if you have small fish that you're getting, such as just some tetras or some rasporas or some cories and things like that, and you're just keeping a small 20-gallon tank, get yourself a 10-gallon tank to quarantine these fish in. It'll be plenty sufficient. Use a little bit of this ICX over the course of a 4 or 5 day period just to make sure that you don't have any problems with your fish. Check your water parameters on your tank that you're putting them in after you get them out of the quarantine tank to make sure that your ammonia is down to nothing, your nitrites are down to nothing, your nitrates are very, very low, and your pH. You want to run your pH somewhere between 6.8 and 7.5 for most fish. They'll do well in that. They'll do well in lower or higher ones for the most part too, but if you can run your fish tanks on a pH like that, you'll be a lot better off. Anyways, thank you for joining me today. I hope I helped you with learning a little bit about how to use medications and when to use them. It's very important if you're going to keep fish. Like I said, every one of us is going to run into this problem sooner or later. I have. Everyone who's been in this business or this hobby has run into it. I've had it only 2 cases that I can remember in the last 7 years, but I've had this on hand, and I do use this in my quarantine tanks lightly just to make sure that the fish do not carry parasites into the community tank, such as ick or velvet or other kinds of parasites that can do just some severe damage to your tank. Anyways, thank you for joining me today. I appreciate it. Make sure you hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and also leave your comments down below here. I will get back to you if you have a question regarding any of these products or regarding any diseases that you might be dealing with in your tanks. I'll be glad to help you with that. I'm not perfect at this. I'm not a doctor. I'm not a scientist, but I have had a lot of experience with dealing with this type of situation. So please don't hesitate to leave a comment down below. I'll usually get back to you within a 24-hour period. Hit the bell up here. That'll give you an idea of when I have any new videos coming out. I appreciate it. That'll be the first indicator, and you'll be the first ones to see those new videos when they do come out. And again, share with your friends. This is building the channel here. Our channel is building, and we're doing real well, and I'm really enjoying doing this. So I hope that you will share with your friends, let them know if they have any problems with their, I have over 200 videos out. If you have any questions, you're going to find it in those videos. If I haven't touched on it, it probably doesn't exist. But anyways, thank you for joining me. We'll talk to you soon, and we'll see you on the next one.